The Lost Continent by Bill Bryson, book review. Having thoroughly enjoyed the last Bill Bryson book I read, I thought I would move on to a next one. And plus, a friend of mine had this on audiobook and he gave me a copy of his audiobook, so it was right there for me. The premise for this book is as follows. It's a travelogue about Bill Bryson's experiences traveling through America. Bill Bryson is an American, but he moved to Britain, I believe in the 1970s, right after he finished college, and spent his adult life in Britain. So this is him coming back to America at the age of 36 and observing a lot of the things that have changed. Hence the title, The Lost Continent. Although the title is a little bit misleading. And some of the blurbs that go along with this book are a little bit misleading as well. You know, the publisher's blurbs. They imply that the whole book is a lament for the lost America of Bryson's youth. That theme does pop up now and then in the book, but more than anything, this is just a travelogue. Bill Bryson spends most of the time in this book describing things like the tacky tourist traps he visits, the arguments he gets into with waitresses, and the annoying accents that people have in the American South. Now, a travelogue of Middle America can be a pretty boring subject, so it represents a challenge for the writer to make the material interesting. I mean, this is not New York or Los Angeles. This is small-town America Bill Bryson is traveling through. But if anyone is up to the challenge, it's Bill Bryson. He's got a real acid pen, and he's not afraid to use it. If he thinks a certain town is a dump, or a certain tourist attraction is a ripoff, he'll tell you in no uncertain terms. And once he gets into the Deep South, he brings with him all his northern stereotypes and preconceptions. In short, he is not a writer at all worried about offending the people he's describing. I'm not sure I would have had the patience to read this book cover to cover as a paperback, but as an audiobook, I loved it. Bill Bryson's wit and commentary are just the perfect kind of thing to have in the background while you're puttering around the apartment. I would put this on while I was cleaning the apartment, and then I would often find excuses to clean more things instead of turning it off and going outside, just so I could continue listening to it. Now, it turned out, I mentioned I got this copy from a friend. It turned out that the copy I had was missing disc 8. So the audiobook originally comes with 10 CDs. My copy was missing CD 8. Now, because this is a travelogue and it doesn't have a linear plot to follow, I didn't even notice it was missing a disc until my third time through listening to it. I generally try to listen to audiobooks a few times through because sometimes they can be hard to absorb on listening one. It wasn't even until listening 3 that I realized it was missing disc 8. So I suppose I haven't actually listened to the whole book. I've missed out on disc 8, and if you want to discount my review or take my review with a grain of salt because of that, yeah, you're welcome to it. My home state of Michigan makes a brief appearance in this book. Bryson talks about the horrors of Detroit, Greenfield Village, which I went to with my family once, and when I was a kid, I don't really remember a lot about it. Gets a nice write-up. Grand Rapids, my hometown, only gets name dropped, Bill Bryson says, as I drove past Grand Rapids, which was a shame. As someone who was from there, I would have thought it was funny to see what Bill Bryson would have thought of it. And then Bill Bryson spent some places in northern Michigan, like Traverse City and Mackinac Island. And these are places I remember from my own childhood vacation trips. Also, parts of this book sounded vaguely familiar to me. Either I had read parts of this book before, Or I think parts of this book might have been at one point published separately as a different essay, which was maybe assigned to me in high school or something. I mean, the book came out way back in 1988, so it could have been floating around in various forms when I was in high school. There's an essay on highway billboard signs, which I could have sworn I read somewhere in high school for like an English class on humorous essays or something like that. I don't know. Listening to this book, because of the immersive experience of being in the book, sometimes you do forget that it came out all the way back in 1988. So for example, when Bill Bryson was complaining about college students and how stupid and politically apathetic they were, there was a second there when I forgot that the college students he's describing are all in their 50s now, and that it's a totally new generation that's in college nowadays. No particular reason for that other than just kind of the nature of listening to a book and being immersed in it and just forgetting the time difference. Yeah, I don't know. Bill Bryson was talking about college students in the 80s. I was still in elementary school in the 80s, so I don't really have a good grasp on what the college scene was like. I do remember reading an essay by Howard Zinn in which he says when he was teaching in the 1980s, the students were a lot more politically interested than people gave them credit for, and that this whole myth of 1980s college students was, well, just that, a myth. But I mean, I don't know. Somebody out there, let me know in the comments if you have any insight into what the college scene was like in the 1980s. Now, I, like Bill Bryson, have spent most of my adult life living abroad. So I can identify with his perspective a little bit. You know, the idea of coming back home and home not being home. Like, you know, having gotten so used to what life is like abroad that when you go back home, American customs all of a sudden strike you as strange or kind of looking at new eyes to American life. That being said, there are some differences. I don't think fundamentally American life has changed all that much since when I was growing up there in the 80s and 90s. Or I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, like, I know technology has changed immensely. We've got smartphones now and the internet and Facebook and stuff like that. But I think the basic infrastructure of the cities is all still the same. Bill Bryson talks about how completely the infrastructure of America has changed since his childhood in the 1950s. He noted how the town centers have completely disappeared and everything is replaced by suburban shopping malls, and how it's just a driving culture, how you have to drive to get from one shopping mall to the other. And also, as somebody who had spent years in Britain, which was, I guess, more pedestrian friendly, Bill Bryson writes about how he was particularly surprised when he tried to walk through the town and found that it was almost impossible to walk anywhere because there would be concrete barriers that would separate the parking lots of one shopping center from another. So it was just assumed that you had to get in your car and drive to the next place. It was assumed that nobody would try and walk. He tried to actually climb over these concrete barriers because it was such a short distance. You know, he thought that made more sense than getting back in his car. But he describes the weird stares people gave them when he climbed over the concrete barrier and walked across to another parking lot. Now, this is something I've noticed myself. I mean, I noticed it even a little bit when I was still living in the United States. There was a couple years as a college student when I was without a car, and so would try to walk from one place in town to the next, and just discovered, you know, something I had never encountered before because I had always driven everywhere or been driven everywhere as a child, how the American cities were just not set up for pedestrians. You really had to either drive or you had to climb over all these obstacles to get to the next place you wanted to go to. The concrete barriers, the ditches, the lack of sidewalks in a lot of places. It's something I especially notice so after having lived abroad and coming back to America. How, yeah, I mean, I don't know, has this changed at all since the 80s and 90s, or is this still just as bad? This has become one of my main pet peeves about American cities, is how they are so unfriendly to pedestrians and how they are forcing people to get into cars. And it's one of Bill Bryson's pet peeves as well. So he and I are on exactly the same page on that. Aside from the travelogue aspect of this book, there's some thoughts on aging. So Bill Bryson is 36, so he's talking about the crises of midlife. He's just right, 36 is when you're just right at that age where your body's not falling apart just yet, but you can see what's coming around the corner, and you're just beginning to realize you're no longer young. I was in my late 20s when I was reading this book, so I wasn't quite 36 yet, but you could see it coming. Now I'm 41, so I'm all the way on the other side of it. And, 41 is not a bad age. I mean, my body is still healthy. I notice it a little bit more after working out in the gym or attempting to go jogging. But, it doesn't hurt to get up in the morning, or I don't have all those aches and pains and stuff yet. I'm sure that's the next thing that's coming. But, you are aware that you are no longer young at this point. Sorry. I'm getting lost in my own digression here. Point being that this is another theme that comes up in Bill Bryson's book, and something I identified with a bit. Yeah. This book was just a pleasure, especially as an audiobook. Bill Bryson is a funny guy, and his wit and humor in describing the various places he goes to shows through, and I was inspired by this book in my own blogging about various cities I went in Japan. I tried to ape his style a little bit. I was a fan.